I'm Catherine Reid, host of the St. Paul Forum, and coming up next is a conversation with John Larsen, philanthropist, activist, and designer. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. And joining me today on the St. Paul Forum is John Larsen, a philanthropist, activist, and designer. So welcome, John. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Catherine. Great to be here.
Good. Well, I got intrigued with your story when I read about you in the online publication, The Line. I'm sure I was familiar with your family because I used to work for the Minnesota Children's Museum, and I know you've been a long-time supporter of the Children's Museum, but I was intrigued because you told your own story about how you decided to focus 50% of your income and your own personal wealth for active causes. So that always catches my eye. So tell me a little bit about kind of your experience in making this, turning in that direction.
Well, it's you know, it's interesting. I was raised by wonderful parents, I think, is where it starts, right? That
and that was here in Minnesota?
Actually, no, in Chicago and St. Louis.
Oh,
and then,
okay.
And then we moved here.
Then you moved.
Finished high school here, but
okay.
in
So
Chicago
your family
and St. Louis,
was
yeah.
elsewhere, and then where did you finish high school?
Actually, at St. Paul Academy. I public school all my life, and then we moved here in inner city St. Paul, and we came from St. Louis, and that seemed sort of scary. Like, what is the big inner city school? It was going to be Central High School, which I now know is a great school, but I went to St. Paul Academy, and it was a wonderful experience because the education there is spectacular and so much attention. It was really great. But yeah, so I finished at St. Paul Academy. But so my folks, I think, really helped me at a very young age understand how important it is to give, to be part of a community, to volunteer, to be active in making your world a little bit of a better place. So that's where I think it started.
But you also talked in the piece about your grandmother, and it's your grandmother on which side of your family?
So my dad's mom, who, you know, it's very interesting. My dad's mom she was born in 1903. She lived to 105. It's a pretty spectacular life. I saw a lot of change in those 105 years.
And she was living where?
And she lived in outside of Madison, Wisconsin, a small farm in Cross Plains, Wisconsin. But her husband worked with Deluxe Corporation, and he was, I believe, their first salesperson, basically, or their first sales manager. And he died when my dad was very young, and that corporation was still closed. It was a closed company, and when he died, they gave my grandma a bunch of shares.
I was just going to say, is this one of those incredible deluxe check?
Yes, it is. It's one of those incredible deluxe checks.
You know, if people from St. Paul know that there are 3M families, there are deluxe check families, there are these great stories of the being paid in stock. So she had a terrible loss. She lost her husband, but she took this resource. So.
She did, and she saved. She was the only person working in her family in the Great Depression. So I mean, she saved everything, and she was very penurious and very careful with how everything went in her life financially, and really ended up amassing a lot of wealth, and really wasn't much of a giver, which I think is very interesting to causes and things like that. But she was incredibly generous inside the family. And toward the end of her life, she funded the John Larsen Foundation, which was her husband's name and my dad's name and my name, with a few $1 million. And so that's kind of the history of the John Larsen Foundation.
But your love of design also was connected to the generosity that she showed your family, if I understand the story. You started getting interested in architecture when you were little?
My grandma took us on trips, which was just spectacular for a little kid to be able to go and see. I saw the pyramids in Egypt, and I saw the Pantheon in Rome, and the Parthenon in Greece, and people always were talking about architecture and architects and design and buildings. I thought, man, is that cool? And so from the time I was about 10 years old, I thought, boy, maybe this is what I should do. And so that I always held out as something that I'd like to do when I grew up. And so that's what I did. I got a Master of Architecture from the University of Minnesota in the 90s, and have had my own design firm for 15 years or so, Design 45.
Okay.
I work, it's a two-person firm. It's a lovely thing. It's just two of us.
And you design what kinds of structures?
Almost all residential work, so additions and remodels and new houses and cabins, but almost all residential. A little bit of commercial. But love to help people. Part of it is, again, it's grounded for me in service, that I don't think of myself as kind of the guy that has all the answers, but really I think of us as really knowledgeable people about how to do things. And I think we're good designers, but ultimately what we want to do is help people achieve their vision for their home. And we can get pretty big egos if people want us to, but often I find it's a more successful residence when people really engage and start to sort of become part of that process of design with us. So
that sounds really exciting.
It is. It's
well,
great.
I'd like to go back a little bit to this passing of the values. So you've described your grandmother as not generous outwardly, but generous inside the community.
Yeah.
So how do you think it was that your parents, who you're giving the credit to, started to turn outward to the community? Where did that come from for them?
Boy, it's a tough one. I don't know if I can point to anything in specific. I just know that, there was an instance, one of my earliest memories of giving was we went to church, and they asked you to pledge something every Sunday, and I had $1 a week allowance when I was growing up, and I pledged a quarter a week, which I soon learned was maybe more than I wanted to afford.
It was overachieving.
I was overextending because, and part of it was we weren't particularly good churchgoers, and so at some point maybe I hadn't been to church for several weeks or even a few months, maybe it was over the summer or something, but I remember, and maybe I just wasn't putting the quarter in an envelope, I'm not sure what happened, but we got an invoice for $13.25, and that was more money than I knew. Wow, right?
Wow, that's a lot I owe.
Mom and Dad bailed me out, which is pretty awesome of them because I had no idea how to do that. But it was a great first lesson, right?
Yeah.
It was on a number of accounts that if I do make a commitment to support something, I need to do that. And another great lesson is that Mom and Dad are really helpful and they love me and they're going to bail me out if something bad happens. But they also talked me through it and how important it was to be doing that. So I'm not sure where all of the inspiration comes from. Just I think being raised in a wonderful way is what it comes down to. I think a lot of then, as I moved into my 20s, I think some of my inspiration for wanting to be more part of my community and more giving back and more involved and more of an advocate, and then ultimately now I think more of a philanthropist too, is that I just kept running into so many causes that are so worthwhile. There's so much that we can do in our communities to create better environments for people. There are problems that need to be addressed, problems that need to be fixed, and I'm just drawn to that stuff. And maybe some of that, again, is that designer in me, right? Is if I see, remodels are awesome because there's always a mess, right? You're always dealing with somebody's serious problem, and it's completely not designed for how they want to be. And I love getting in there and trying to fix that.
So there's an applicability.
Yeah.
I know, again, we're basing some of this on my reading of your story elsewhere. I know that you talked about the fact that you maybe made some mistakes in your 20s that you decided to also address. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, man. I think it's a combination of a number of things. When I I'm trying to think what comes first here. But when I went away to college, as I think a lot of people do, we kind of get wild and crazy. And I drank too much and stuff like that. But there was a combination of things going on, and I'm a recovering alcoholic and have been for 20-some years now. But so I went to college and I decided it was important for me to, trying to figure out which comes first. So part of it is coming out as gay too, and so the alcoholism and the coming out as gay was completely interlinked. And I mean, I was raised, fairly conservative and careful, and gay was not at all okay. The only possible sort of model out there, I think, was Elton John and maybe Liberace. And I didn't know about any of it. I mean, this was like, that's not me. I don't know what that is.
Who are those
That's
people?
pretty scary. So I thought, I can't do this, and so I drank a lot. And at some point, it became obvious that I needed to stop doing this. I'm trying to remember, what was the question that you just asked me?
Well, I was asking sort of how that pathway, and what I'm really getting is that you were really coming to an intersection of identities. You had already claimed that identity as community connected, but maybe what was disconnected was, how do I be me and be in this community or in this family? That's really the question I have, is you confronted these two parts of your life. One was drinking too much, and you decided to do something about that. But at the same time, I guess you're saying, I decided to express my true identity, come forward. Were those coincident?
Yeah, well, and so I think that experience of being gay and not having any idea what to do with that, right, is something that really helps drive my passion today, and helps gives me empathy, right, for other folks that are struggling with whatever it is that they're struggling with, that need some help, something like that. So what I did with that was, as I moved into my later 20s and into my 30s, there were lots of opportunities to help out in the LGBT community. So, I did some volunteering with the Twin Cities Gay Men's Chorus. I was on their board. I became their board chair. I don't sing. I was their first non-singing board chair. That was an obvious place for me to go help out, in part because I was invited to participate. And then, in the last 10 years or so, I got a lot more involved in advocacy. In 2005, should I jump into that?
Just one second. Yep. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with John Larsen, who's an activist and designer and philanthropist. I started to say philosopher. You're probably that too. So you decided to choose a path of both advocacy and philanthropy, those two things. But this design maybe being the integrating component, which I think is interesting to understand, how problem solving, which is what you see design as being a way to express these parts of yourself. Why don't you talk for a minute about as you just started to talk about sort of how you've turned yourself toward advocacy, and what does that look like for you?
Well, in 2005, 2006, there was a strong push at the state legislature to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to amend our Constitution to ban gay marriage, basically. It was led by Michelle Bachmann, who was in, I think, our House at the time. I thought that was crazy, and why would we want to do that? So I met with a number of folks. I didn't instigate the meeting, but I met with a number of folks, and we started an organization called Together Minnesota, which was a coalition of lots of different organizations, everything from advertising agencies to nonprofits, to sign on to this thing and say, hey, this is crazy, let's not do this. Okay, so we needed to raise some money to pay for a lobbyist at the Capitol, and we needed to raise some money to do some research. We did those things. We raised, I don't know if it's not quite $100,000 or something, did those things. Luckily, we were able to stop it at that time. Senator Dean Johnson was in charge, and I think we owe a lot of, a debt of gratitude to him for kind of halting that business. And the research that we did was so exciting, and that's part of why he was able to decide this isn't the right thing to do at this time. We found out that 79% of Minnesotans think that same-sex couples should have the same rights and responsibilities as everybody else. And so this was kind of crazy. 79% think that everybody should be treated equally, and yet there were like 30% thought that marriage equality made sense. So we decided, so we were able to keep it off the ballot, and then through building that extra capacity, that extra $100,000 of donations, those meetings, those people that were involved, we thought, well, maybe we can keep this going. So a couple of friends and I, we started an organization called Project 515. And that came out of, we did a bunch more research to find out how many laws on the books in Minnesota are designated around rights and responsibilities around marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are 515.
Okay, so that's where that
so we
came
started
up, 515.
Exactly. So there are 515 laws in the books in Minnesota designating rights, responsibilities, and obligations to married couples. Same-sex couples have access to none of those. Mm-hmm. And so we started that, and we launched that in 2007, 8, and 9. Governor Pawlenty actually signed one of our bills, I think unknowingly, because he kind of vowed not to do anything to support the gay rights movement. But he did, because it was a better law for everybody in Minnesota. And then of course in 2010, when the legislature decided to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2012, defining marriage as one man and one woman exclusively. Project 515 was one of the partners that launched Minnesotans United for All Families. We did that the night of the bill passing. So that's kind of my history in that movement, and then continuing forward to what I see as a brilliant success for Minnesota and Minnesotans on Election Day this last year.
What was so interesting, I think, around this personal storytelling and this integration that you're talking about for yourself, is that it seems as though with the movement around this, people have decided to use ways in which we can find commonality among each other as a tool. I found that very interesting, but also I was interested that you've also looked at homeless youth, and I think there's been some observation on your part that that's sometimes connected to their sexual identity and so forth. I was really intrigued. You've decided to be rather intimate in your involvement with people, and I understand you've actually taken people in to live in your home. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, because that's a rare. I think your 50% donation is rare enough. You moved up from the 25% to the 50%. So, but that part too interested me. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that and what that's been like?
Well, there's an organization in Minneapolis called Avenues for Homeless Youth, and at Avenues they house a program called the Host Home Program, and it's specifically focused on LGBT homeless youth. And what they do is they match youth with homes that are stable and supportive. And this is an organization started by Rocky Samoys years ago, maybe 12 years ago or something, and that I had supported financially. It was great. This wonderful organization. I thought, there's no way I could ever do this. How could you ever have a stranger come and live in your home? And I think the reason I thought that is because I was living by myself at the time.
Oh, okay.
You know, and I thought, that's at least part of the reason. And I thought, man, it's just scary. Well, at some point, maybe 5 years ago or so, I'd been living with my partner for years, and we have a lovely home and a really stable environment. I work in the carriage house outside the home. Mike works at the home. So we're around a lot, right? So it became obvious that we should do this. We have the capacity, we have an extra bedroom, so we signed up, and more than just signing a check, we signed up as part of the program, and now Rosie has been with us for 4 years with some time away at college. She's finishing up actually right now at Augsburg College on the Dean's List. She's applied to 8 graduate programs.
In what field?
In sociology. We're taking her to Boston and to Atlanta to look at graduate programs in a month or so. Yeah, Emory in Atlanta. And it's one of the greatest joys of my life to watch Rosie succeed spectacularly. She came from a place where she wasn't supported. It was a difficult life. She was at best couch surfing, and what we did is give her a home and give her some food, and she is on the dean's list. I mean, 3 A's and an A- in her first semester at college.
That's great.
Applying to graduate schools, doctorate programs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're really saying is that the common ground we have is that we all need love, tending, and support. Mm. And you've chosen a path that is a more active form of involvement and giving. Would you say that's for everyone, that particular path?
I can't say that's for everybody.
Uh-huh.
And you know, you got to make sure your home is safe, right? And if you're raising kids and you bring in a stranger, I think that I don't know that I could do that. Mm-hmm. But I think that if I'm in a safe place and I'm confident and secure, I think it's been a huge gift to me, right? This isn't just about helping Rosie out. This
Mm-hmm.
is about, I think, building community, and her gift back to us is trust. You know, and that's a priceless
Mm-hmm.
thing. So.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that it's meant a lot to her. So when you think about the path that you've chosen now, what are you looking forward to? What do you see as some new challenges and targets for this particular path and combination of ideas that you have?
Oh, geez, that's a big question. I think we need to keep dreaming big. You know, I have this focus currently on rights for same-sex couples because it's an obvious disparity in our system, and I think we can fix it. And it's so gratifying to be part of a movement that's being fixed at the moment, mm-hmm. right? Literally in Minnesota right now, our legislature this session, I believe, will be picking up this issue and making the right decisions. And our governor is going to sign marriage equality. Boom. We're done. What a spectacular thing to be part of the turning of a tide. You know, literally working my butt off and then being part of the turning of the tide. Mm-hmm. So cool. But I think we need to keep dreaming, and it's not just about inequity around LGBT issues, but it's about inequity in many ways. And it's about so much more than that. My real passion that's kind of underlies all the social justice work is environmental consciousness. And that's a great pairing with my field. I know a lot about green design. We just did a wonderful home that's a Minnesota Green Star Gold home, which is kind of like a lot of people are more familiar with LEED. It's like a LEED Gold / Platinum kind of project. It is a wonderful thing to be able to design homes in such a way that we're not using energy. So at any rate, I'd really, really like to finish the work that I've done around rights for same-sex couples and kind of segue into, you know, environmental work and environmental justice work. So I think ways to kind of tie things together is that you know, we have politics, we have philanthropy, we have big dreams and big visions, we have activism. As a human, as a citizen, I want to do all of these things. You know, our foundation is a 501c3 and it funds only 501c3 work, which is, you know, nonprofit / mm-hmm. educational work. It's not sort of political advocacy, right. But it can be research to support political mm-hmm. advocacy, and we do that kind of thing. We support and we try to build partnerships with organizations kind of across multiple silos. It's not just nonprofits, but we're trying to build relationships with everybody. Nonprofits can't do this on their own. I don't think our politicians and our government can do it on its own. I think we need to kind of build these webs. And then I think, you know, when I think about our decision to bring Rosie into our home, I think it's important to live, to not just sort of write the check and be done, mm-hmm. and not just make the introduction and be done, but for me it's important to kind of live in it and be a part of it, to be a part of that solution, to make the connection. So if our foundation can't support any political action, I need to do that on my own. I need to write those checks individually. I need to find ways to kind of make sure that the whole moves forward, not just a piece of it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see it as an interconnected more of that as you decide that it's not just out there, that there's inner work, is what you're saying, that helps you do more on the outer level. I guess that's why I was intrigued by your choice to have that intimate relationship with the homeless woman, is that it does force you to face it internally and not just say, I can make the solution outside of myself. So I'm intrigued by that you decided to live in it as integrated a way as you can, and I guess I hear you saying, I have more that I want to explore and do, figure out how to take it to another level. So that integration seems to be intriguing. So if you were to invite people to follow any one of these threads, what would you encourage them to do?
Well, I think the work that's being done by Minnesotans United right now, and Project 515 is a part of that, Outfront Minnesota is a part of that. I think it's so, like I said, so gratifying to be part of a solution that's happening right now. And that stuff takes money, it takes volunteers, it takes time. The success of Minnesotans United on November 6th last year was spectacular, in part because there were 27,000 volunteers in the last couple of weeks. There were 65,000 volunteers. There were 200 and some thousand contacts made by that organization. That's movement building, and movement building really moves stuff, right? It's pretty spectacular. You can't stop the will of many, many people, but again, it only takes a few folks to get it going. And I look back in 2005, 2006, when a small group of people came together and said, hey, let's do something about this.
The great Margaret Mead quote.
Yes, that's right.
It just takes a small. So I hear a sense of risk-taking, courage. Those are some of the tips I think you are offering to us, and being consistent with your own themes, if you will. I really appreciate the way you talked about that inner generosity of your grandmother, followed by the outer generosity and support, so that idea that you're now offering that support as a family, that you're essentially communicating to Rosie, we're there for you. We know you'll make mistakes too, and we'll provide some of that grounding, is what it sounds like. All of us do better when we're grounded somewhere. So if people want to know more about your work, do you want them to look at your site for your design work, or your foundation, or just so they know kind of where to learn more about what you do?
Everything's online, so design45.com, all spelled out, project515.org, jlfound.org is the foundation. Those are 3 websites that come to mind. mnunited.org. Okay.
And are you, I'm curious about your home now. Is your home pictured anywhere? Has there been a story? Is it featured on your website, the design?
Yeah, it is. It was, that's a whole nother huge story, but it's a super green home, and it was also an ASID showcase home. So
ASID means
American Society of Interior Designers.
Interior Designers, okay.
Yeah, so it was, a lot of people actually know about the house, and a lot of people actually went through it last year.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's fantastic. So I am really curious. I know I read about the house, but I haven't taken the time to look. But it's an aspirational home for sure. Thank you so much for your time today, John, and thank you so much. That's all we have time for. Come and join us again next week on the St. Paul Forum.